Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our Google Hangout. My name is Rebecca, and I am a school psychologist in the state of Connecticut. And I'm here with Dr. Barry Babarash. And I'd like to introduce him first. And I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I think you will all find it really interesting and helpful as well. Dr. Babarash has been a school psychologist for over 35 years. He's in New York, and he was born and raised in New York, but is currently in New Jersey. In addition to consulting with public and private schools, he's currently adjunct professor in both the School of Psychology doctoral program at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine and the Master's Certification Program at Rowan University. He has also served as an adjunct professor at Rutgers University, Fairleigh Dickinson University, and New Jersey City University. He's currently chairperson of NYASP Government. I could try to pronounce that, but I won't. Government and Professional Relations Committee, and also serves on the Government and Professional Relationships Committee on the National Association of School Psychologists. He is a past president of the New Jersey Association of School Psychologists and is currently president-elect. Barry earned his master's degree from Pace University and his doctoral degree from Temple University. Welcome, Barry. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Sure. My pleasure.
I'm really excited to have you, and I hope I didn't blub your intro too much.
You did a better job than I would have done.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you today because one of the big changes that is happening for all of us in our world very shortly, I think in September of 2017, if I'm correct,
yep.
is the new law, ESSA. Is that how you say it? Or do you spell it out, ESSA?
I've heard both ways. I usually say ESSA, but I've heard both.
Okay.
I usually say ESSA. I don't know why.
All right. So ESSA. For our viewers, can you tell us a little bit about the changes that we'll be going through with the change in the law? And I know NASP has a wonderful pamphlet on exactly what we can expect, but maybe if you can give us a little summary of what you think will be the major differences for school psychologists and schools.
Well, ESSA is taking the place of No Child Left Behind. And I think the major changes, without going into a whole lot of detail in general, is that it gives the states much more authority in determining their educational policies and reduces the role of the federal government. In terms of school psychology, there are two roles that ESSA has created. One is specialized instructional support personnel, and the other is mental health service provider. And in both those descriptions in ESSA, school psychologists are specifically mentioned. So it really opens the door for school psychologists to provide a wide range of services.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's going to be a significant opportunity
Very much so.
For school psychologists and also states and local districts to make some positive changes. So tell us, Barry, I know that you have been leveraging this potential positive change in the law to advocate for your students and in your schools. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started, what made you come to that idea?
Well, I've been involved with the State School Psychology Association and with NASP for a lot of years. In New Jersey, the role of the school psychologist is very much, in many ways, a role that revolves around special education, gatekeeper kinds of roles, IEPs, annual reviews, all those kinds of things. And ESSA really provides, and we've talked over the years about how do we expand the role of the school psychologist, which has been challenging, but ESSA really opens the door because it describes the role of school psychologists in the way that school psychologists are trained, and gives, certainly in New Jersey, provides a pathway to providing those comprehensive services.
Yeah. So what would you say were which were the priorities that you zeroed in on when you began to think about this project?
Well, I think we started to zero in on, we've talked a lot about the idea that in New Jersey, school psychologist is very centered around special education. But the profession of school psychology is about all children. So we started talking about and focusing on providing comprehensive school psychological services and providing those services to all children, and also meeting the needs of the whole child. And ESSA really, again, uh, provides a pathway to that. And so to me, it really resonated. And
Absolutely.
that's really what kind of got me kind of pursuing this. And my colleagues in New Jersey have, we're all working together very much to kind of transform things a bit in New Jersey.
That's wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit about your first steps? Describe a little bit your efforts to take advantage of these opportunities?
Well, what we've done as I became, more aware and knowledgeable, and again, NASP has fantastic resources on that. To me, what we wanted to do is get started as early as we could. So in April, we met with the assistant commissioner of education, and the director of special education to talk about ESSA, to provide them with materials on ESSA, most of them which were NASP materials, and quite frankly, it contained information that they weren't even aware of, and talk about the role. We developed materials on how school psychologists can play a role in the implementation of ESSA in terms of the services they can provide. But not just that, but what we had asked is not just that we provide those wide range of services, but we want to be at the table as the state starts to plan for implementation. So we don't want to just be there as it's rolled out. We want to be part of planning the rollout. We want to be at that table. And when our meeting ended and they met with us for quite a while, which we were very appreciative of, you kind of reinforced that idea. And the assistant commissioner said to me, "Don't worry, you're on our radar." So I took that to heart, and that's really how we got things started with ESSA, with that meeting several months ago.
That's wonderful. And when you first approached your stakeholders, like your colleagues in your building and your superintendent, and you talked about having this meeting, how did you bring them on board? Were there any ways that you, or things that you said that convinced them to take these steps?
Well, that's probably that's probably down the road, because at this point we were just this is, of course, ESSA is just kind of in its embryonic state. We were dealing strictly with the State Department of Education.
Oh, okay.
What you're talking about I think is a step down the road as we talk about school psychologists talking to superintendents and principals and people like that. We're planning some things as that in terms of that as well, but that's probably down the road a little bit.
Oh, that's interesting to me, because I imagine in my building, before I reached out, outside of my building, I would gather a posse of stakeholders within, maybe.
Well, that's what we're planning on doing for people. Yes. I'm not in the public schools anymore.
Okay.
So personally, probably wouldn't be involved in that, but we are going to be involved in advocacy efforts where we're going to be talking to school psychologists about doing things just like that.
Yeah.
But my impression is that at this point, at the local level, school psychologists in the school districts, ESSA is something they're just hearing about. They don't know a lot about. We've had a presentation on it. We have more coming, but they're just kind of becoming familiar with it.
That's great. And so can you tell us about the data and resources that you used? You gathered information, you learned about the changes in ESSA, right. You gathered that information, right. And then what did you do? What other data or resources did you use to?
Well, we have, NASP has great resources. Mm-hmm. Another great resource we have that I think was very valuable, we very recently did a survey of school psychologists and asked them, what kind of things would they like to be doing in New Jersey? What would you like to do more of? And the things they mentioned, if I could, I'll read a couple of those at the top of the list. Things they want to do more of: design and implement universal screening programs, participate in development and implementation of practices involving school climate, implement and evaluate prevention intervention programs, evaluate and implement implementation outcomes of interventions, identify high risk factors and protective factors, provide mental health services in the schools. We can go on, but those are all things that they want to do that ESSA calls for. So that was really important data. We've also, quite honestly, talked to people from around, say, just collecting data anecdotally about what's going on in their schools. And I have a chance to do that, not just because I'm involved with the state association, but through my teaching. I'm a practicum supervisor, so I go around and visit different districts. So I get a chance to talk to people from around the state, and they all want to do this kind of work. One of the things that we want to find out, there are some schools, to be honest, that where the school psychologists have this role, and we want to know from them. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this role. What did you do? Now, with one person that I know, she had expertise in this area, and she advocated for herself, demonstrated her expertise, but also demonstrated her willingness to do this kind of work, and she's now in that kind of role full time. Somebody else I know who's doing this kind of work, the district had, when she came into the job, the district had already defined this is your job. Your job is to do counseling, prevention, school climate. So she kind of walked into it. So we're trying to collect information about how, if you're in this role, how did you get there?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that having more contact time with kids and being at that tier 1 universal level
Absolutely.
Is fabulous. So what did you find were the biggest challenges and barriers?
Well, the biggest challenge and barrier as we move forward from here is, I teach a class, and part of the class is systems change. And I use a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it. And the quote is that the biggest obstacle to change is not developing new ideas, but discarding old ones. And that's going to be the biggest challenge, is especially in New Jersey, the role of the school psychologist has been in place for literally decades. That's how school psychologists come to see themselves. That's how administrators see them. And they don't necessarily see them as providing these comprehensive services. So that's going to be, to me, is going to be the biggest obstacle, is is educating and advocating for a very, very different role in New Jersey than what's existed in the past. And that, again, is going to be challenging because the status quo is extremely powerful. I'll give you an example, if I can. In 2010, New Jersey passed an anti-bullying law, very comprehensive. And it calls for a position, anti-bullying specialists. And we went around talking to school psychologists, telling them to get involved with this. This is right up their alley. The data we have, which basically is anecdotal data, is that very few school psychologists are in that role. Most of the people in that role are guidance counselors or other kinds of people, but there are very few school psychologists, because the school psychologists stay in their role as, the gatekeeper, the special ed overseer. And so that role is really the biggest obstacle for them to taking on a new role, and we're going to be in that same boat. And we're looking at different ways of addressing that. Because I feel we have to be realistic about what those obstacles are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know I get the sense from talking to school psychologists on social media and in my circles that people are very frustrated by administrative expectations and counterbalance with what they know they could do in their building. So having these conversations and opening people's minds,
that's right,
will be so powerful.
Exactly.
And helpful, but getting there is tough.
It'll be very challenging.
Yeah.
And the challenge is going to be, we can tell schools, I believe, and I think our data bears it out, that school psychologists want to do this kind of work. We don't have to convince them. We don't have to sell them on this. Absolutely. The problem is going to be, and I've experienced this, where we go to a school psychologist and say, this is a great opportunity for you. And they say, well, that's fine, but I've got 70 kids I'm case managing. I have all these IEPs to write. I'm behind on my evaluations. I have reevaluations. I have annual reviews to do. Those tasks take up 110% of my time. When do I do this?
Yes.
We have to acknowledge that and work on a systemic level, not just with them.
With individuals, right?
Also working with, and we're working to do that.
And how are you planning, and how have you in the past, and how are you planning in the future to engage members of your state association and other school psychologists to advance your efforts?
Mm-hmm. Well, what we've done is we've put information on our webpage, on our Facebook page about ESSA. We have something, I think it's called Great News for School Psychologists, and it talks about all the things that school psychologists do that are part of ESSA. We had Kelly Valancourt from NASP came and did a keynote address and a workshop on it. Myself and two of my colleagues are doing a presentation at our December conference on ESSA and the role of school psychologists. We have put things in our newsletter. We send out email blasts. So we're looking at different ways of keeping the membership informed and up to date as to what's happening. And also, advocacy. How do I go about? And that's what our presentation on December is going to focus on, is advocacy.
Yeah.
How to advocate. What do I have to do to advocate to get into this role?
Oh, that's wonderful. I can't wait to hear more about that when it happens. If you could share with us, I'd be happy to share with everyone. Yeah.
Another thing that I'm doing, and I think this part is the part I enjoy the most, quite frankly, is I was invited up to Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey to do a presentation for their doctoral students. Actually, I think all the graduate students in school psychology at ESSA, because I think it's real important that people who are grad students and early career professionals really get in on the ground floor on this and take a leadership role on this.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that are going to have to live with this.
Absolutely.
I mean, the law is probably going to be in effect for the next 10 to 15 years. No Child Left Behind is 15 years old. Right. It's likely this is going to be the same. So they're the ones that are going to have to live with it. I think it's important that they have a voice in what this looks like in their state and in their district. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
I find that so hopeful as an early career person, because I'm still establishing my role in my building. So there's a lot of potential there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So all of my intern friends out there and early career people, we can do this. We can definitely make some positive.
Absolutely, and it's more important that folks at the very beginning get involved in this. And I've said to my friend, it's more important what you guys think than what I think, because for me, I'm sort of at the end of the, I'm coming toward the end. I have more time behind me than ahead of me. So, but for people who are young, who are at the beginning, starting out, this is going to be what you have to live with. And you want to make it as good as you can, make it as comprehensive as you can, and really make it what school psychology is all about. So I think it's important that the people who are starting out be there at the ground floor and make their voices heard. I think it's real important.
That's wonderful. And we're looking forward to sharing that advocacy workshop that you give, because that can be a great tool for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What would you say the key messages that seem to resonate most with decision makers in your state or district are?
What I see from decision makers at the state level in New Jersey, what they are focused on seems to be compliance with federal law and the number of children who are in special education and reducing those numbers. And I think at the district level, there are similar issues, plus the issue of cost. How do we reduce cost? How do we reduce numbers? And those are the issues that seem to resonate with them. So what we try to do is talk about how the services we provide can potentially reduce those costs, potentially could keep those children out of special education by providing things like mental health services to children who are in general education that potentially would keep them out of that special education, those special education programs, which again reduce costs. So we're looking at things that school psychologists do: early intervention, prevention, all social emotional learning, all these things with younger children and children in general education potentially will reduce those costs and reduce those numbers. That seems to be what resonates with them.
Absolutely.
So that's what we've kind of focused on.
I'm sure that resonates with parents as well. And
I'm sure it does too. I think, we've been thinking about what other groups we want to partner with. One of the things that we have not done to this point, but that we've talked about doing, is partnering with parent groups. Because to me, parents are the most logical allies of school psychologists. They want what's best for their child, and so their voice is the loudest voice. They're the taxpayers, they're the voters. So partnering with parents, I think, is something, as we look down the road, is something we want to do more of. I think it's real important.
So important. I think that's a great idea. Yes, to me, they're kind of the top of the food chain. Well, maybe the kids Absolutely. Are. They're right after that.
Well, it's parents and their kids, and parents, they are advocates for their kids. Maybe we, in schools, maybe, there's not always an agreement on what's best. But what I have found in my 100 years of being a school psychologist is that parents want what's best for their kids.
Sure.
They really do. Their vision may be different from my vision or from the school's vision, but they're doing it, whatever we're advocating for, it's because they think it's best.
Yeah.
And so I think they become natural partners for us.
That's beautiful. I love that. What do you see as the next steps? What next steps do you see as being essential in continuing to move forward? We've talked about this a little bit, but I am diligently following my notes. What would you say? Maybe if we could just kind of give quick steps from beginning to end, just like as a summary of what we've talked about, and then.
One thing that looking down the road, and we've kind of done a little bit. I mentioned parents. I think that's the next step. One thing I think that what we have to do is start making more contacts with principals, supervisors, and superintendents, because in any given school district, they're the ones that define your role. So, for example, in I guess it's October, the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association is having their yearly conference, and we are going to be an exhibitor at their conference. We're going to have a table. We're going to have materials on not just on ESSA and not just on school psychologists, but different facets of education, so they can start associating whether it's retention policy or classroom management or depression or whatever it might be, that they can say, here's some information that your school psychologist can give you on these various things that will be of interest to you. So we're going to be there in October as an exhibitor. And I've done this at the NEA conference, but it also gives you a chance to, as people walk by the table, to talk with them, ask them what their concerns are, and then talk to them about how school psychologists can play a role in that. So that's something else looking down the road that we're planning on doing.
That's a great idea. So I think of that as kind of collaboration with other state and national associations for administrators and
Absolutely.
teachers, all the stakeholders. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's
and again,
great.
with the State Department of Education as well.
Sure.
One of the things that's worked well for us is we have a long-standing relationship with them. Mm-hmm. So unlike possibly some other groups, when we ask for a meeting with them, they always say yes. We always meet with them. So we have that relationship that we've built up over years, and that's been really, really helpful in our efforts.
That is really helpful. And you mean, by we, you mean the New Jersey State Association of School Psychologists?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
So one recommendation maybe for early career folks or new school psychologists is to connect with your state associations and get involved.
I was just going to say that, absolutely. And maybe even get involved with their executive board or whatever it's called in their state, so they can really have a voice. We had a meeting with the assistant commissioner of education. We had 2 people come with us, neither of whom have more than 2 or 3 years of experience, but they were at the table with us with the assistant commissioner.
Wonderful.
I thought that was real important, that they're there to get the experience and to begin to see that as part of their role as a school psychologist, as an advocate, is not just advocating for kids in their school, but advocating for kids at the upper levels of the state. So I thought that was real important that they were there, and I thought it was great.
That is great, and maybe make a dent in the vision of the school psychologist role, because their vision can be so much more free since
Absolutely. Absolutely right. They haven't been, they're going to try to function the way they've been trained.
Right.
And then you get that disparity between what I've been trained to do, what I think I'm going to do, but look at what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I think what happens, just anecdotally, is people begin to adapt to their environment.
Sure.
And so as the years go by, what they didn't necessarily see as their job, now they do see as their job.
Absolutely.
But people who are young, who are just starting out, they're not there. They're still seeing school psychology for what it is. So their voice could become real effective, I think.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons that this vehicle, video podcasting and connecting with people, it can be so powerful.
Absolutely.
To share this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's going to be additional information and data that you have to collect, that you'll want to collect and share as you make progress towards these goals?
Well, I think the data we want to collect is from school psychologists in their school districts, especially this coming year as ESSA is planned to roll out. It's going to drift down to the district level. And we're going to want to know what's happening in the different districts, and how can we help? What do you need from us as a state association to help you as it gets rolled out in your district? And at our conference in December, we'll talk a lot more about that. But it's all, again, it'll go into our newsletter, it'll go into our webpage and Facebook page, to have to maintain that contract. So we definitely need that information. And we also need, NASP is constantly putting out just fantastic information. So the more we know, the more we're able to advocate.
Sure. I agree. So let's see. I wanted to ask you, how will you keep your members and colleagues informed of your progress? And how will you continue to involve them with a role in that progress?
Well, again, I think we'll let them know through various kinds of social media, through our conferences, through email blasts, all different kinds of ways that are available to us. We'll let them know what's happening and actually ask them to respond if they have any comments, questions, experiences, to let us know.
Yeah. So have you noticed already you're making these strong connections, and you're getting you're getting support from the different state and local organizations towards your goals? Have you noticed any changes yet besides the hope for when ESSA is implemented? Have you noticed any changes?
I haven't seen anything as yet, but the school year is just starting. So I'll be interested to hear as the school year progresses and people get into their roles, what they're seeing in their school districts. Because as you said, September 17 is when this starts.
Right.
So districts are not going to wait till August of 17. They're going to start, the state is starting already. One of the things that we're doing, by the way, the state is holding hearings on ESSA, where they want public comments, and they're holding it in 3 different areas of New Jersey, and we have members of our executive board attending each of those hearings to provide testimony. So that's another thing that we're going to be doing.
Wow.
And we would encourage other school psychologists to do that as well.
Sure. I have no idea what's going on in the state of Connecticut, and I'm really curious to find out now. So along those lines, what advice do you have for other school psychologists and myself who are planning to engage in efforts to ensure ESSA implementation results in the best possible outcomes for students?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, again, I'm not being paid by NASP to say this, but NASP has great resources, and the more you know, the more you're able to advocate for your role. I think it's important to start having conversations at the school level with superintendents, with principals, things like a presentation before your Board of Education, which, by the way, is also parents, who may not have any awareness of this at all, and talk a little bit about the law, and talk a little bit about what school psychologists can do in these roles as specialized instructional support personnel, as mental health service providers, what school psychologists can do to fulfill these roles. So having those with your principal, one of the things we've often talked about in advocacy training is we've suggested to people every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, go into your principal's office and ask them, is there anything you're working on that maybe I can help you with?
Yeah.
And that's a good way to stay in touch, but to also let them know you're there to do more than just, the routine things, that you're there. Some schools may have a problem with bullying. Well, gee, I can help with bullying. I know a lot about that. I know a lot about prevention, how to address it, things like that.
That's wonderful.
So that becomes something I would suggest. I would also, if you have the opportunity, we talked about parents, and schools usually have PTA, things like that. So maybe ask to see if you could talk to the PTA and let them know about this law, which they're probably not aware of. Educate them as to what school psychologists can do, which is really telling them, here's what I can do for your child. Here are all the great services that your child will benefit from with this new federal law. So I think that could be real effective. And again, to volunteer on different kinds of committees that come up. If there's an ESSA committee, volunteer for that. But even things like if there's a school climate committee, volunteer to be on that. If there's a classroom management committee or an anti-bullying committee or anything with academics, volunteer to be on those kinds of committees so you could be seen in that comprehensive role. So things like that, I think, would be real helpful.
That's great, Barry. It's been such an inspirational conversation so far. I am thrilled to speak to you tonight. Is there anything in kind of summary that you'd like to say, or something that stuck with you the most throughout this process that you'd like to share?
Well, I think, and I guess it goes back 100 years ago to when I was trained as a school psychologist, and there was no special education laws, and what we did is we provided comprehensive school psychological services to all children. And I think when special education became federal law, and for very good reason, by the way, but it kind of directed school psychology into a role that focuses on, again, developing IEPs, all of which is important work, but it became, I think, the focus of the work. And I think this provides an opportunity for school psychologists to provide those comprehensive school psychological services. I know ESSA, the framework of ESSA uses a multi-tiered system to support framework, which I think is great. It's tailor-made for school psychologists. And NASP has a lot of great information. They have on the website something called a crosswalk, which looks at parts of ESSA, MTSS, and this role of the school psychologist based on the practice model. And it's really a fantastic resource.
Those are great. I'm going to try to connect the links to those resources under the notes for this broadcast.
Okay.
I thank you so much for sharing your time
pleasure
with us tonight, and thank you for your inspiration and your great work.
Well, we're trying. We'll see what happens, but we're trying.
Wonderful. And I hope to speak to you again. I hope you'll come back on another time.
I'd be happy to.
Thanks, Barry. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay.